Well, good morning, everyone. This is our 8th presentation by Dr. Ravi Ravindra. We are in our 2nd week, and the discussions have been quite vast and going on to different subjects of depth and reflection. So without further ado, I'm going to just hand it over to Ravi ji.
Okay, again, something that I always tend to forget myself, and I imagine so do the others, that there is a call from the spiritual sources to try to become more and more aware why I have been created, and then to try to correspond to the call as I understand it. In general, expressed, of course, in varieties of ways in different cultural traditions, but in general, that this body and mind exists for a few decades in order to assist the evolution of this particle of divinity at whatever level it now is in me. Therefore, always a call to any searcher to periodically wonder, what are the sorts of actions I should be trying to undertake? How do I become more and more aware what this subtle spiritual energy in me wishes me to undertake? And always a suggestion that the mind cannot quite figure it out. Our ordinary mind can't hear these subtle vibrations, and that it is necessary to quieten this mind, which just jumps around from one association to another. And even though what I receive, or in a manner of speaking, what I hear, I may not be able to express it to anybody, but it is much more likely to touch my heart than anything else. It's a constant reminder by all the sources, including even the great scientists, that the first recognition of some subtle truth, whether it is about the external universe as the scientists are concerned about, or the inner connection with the divine reality, whatever one is searching for, that the first entry to truth is from the heart rather than from the mind. Heart or feelings are touched by something, then often it is necessary, especially in the scientific world, absolutely necessary, to express whatever one understands in external language. But in spiritual teachings, constant reaffirmation that it really still cannot be described, even by the greatest sages. But call again and again for us to receive this subtle energy. And as I have more than once said already here, that this energy enters into us as breath. Divine breath, keeping this body alive for a little while. So pay some attention to this breath, but without trying to hold it outside or inside. And also a reminder of something I have said many times, that to receive these subtle energies, I need to be more and more relaxed, because that is what allows more receptivity from my side. But to be clear, it's not a receptivity. Even, for example, for many people, a glass of whiskey will relax them. No, it's a receptivity with certain kind of willingness and attention to receive something, One of my mentors in the Gurdjieff teaching used to say, it's almost a call to be like a relaxed arrow. From that perspective, certain kind of activity, one may even call it tension if necessary, is required. If all the strings in a guitar are completely relaxed, no music can be made. So what I often say, what we need is an active receptivity, not a passive receptivity. More and more relaxation, but more and more attention. Not mental attention trying to grab something or to describe something. And intentionally, as if I breathe in through my skull. And I place my out breath into the whole of my body, right down to the toes, nourishing this whole body with these subtle energies I receive, with an attitude of submission, but including attention, a willingness to receive it. Also, you have heard me say this more than once, what we need is an attitude of prayer, which is really inviting us to submit to sacred energies and wish to invite them to touch us. But at the same time, in the posture of meditation, looking deeper and deeper inside ourselves, which is where we would ultimately find our connection with these subtle energies. There is no reason for us to dismiss, for example, a remark of Christ, the kingdom of God is within you. Of course, also outside us, but we pay attention more and more inside. Since we are always, in a way, short of time, given our things to attend to, so please take 3 more breaths, and then we'll stop this part. This is a remark of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. First of all, look at the way Krishna is portrayed here. Krishna in the Indian tradition is regarded as the love incarnation of God. That is really the main emphasis he places all the time. And obviously he's playing flute here, and it's actually Bansuri and the various birds come together, etc. So now we look at this remark. Steadfast in yoga, the knower of truth realizes, truly I do nothing at all. Some of these things I used to hear as a kid. And on one occasion I said, I don't know why the adults are getting so confused about these remarks. I want to be an advanced yogi, so I will just go lie down and do nothing, if that's what makes me an advanced yogi. So I lay down on my bed for a few hours and doing nothing. And then I was getting hungry. So I decided to try to go to the kitchen to get some food, but my mother said, no, you decided to do nothing, so just go lie down. And I'm now getting hungrier and hungrier. Then I realized, damn it with Krishna, I'm hungry. I need to do something to get some food. So one then realizes that these remarks are not at a very ordinary level. These are very subtle remarks, and we will explore this a little bit today. So There is also a very famous remark actually in Tao Te Ching, a Chinese great classic. A sage does nothing, but nothing is left undone. What exactly do these things mean? So we'll try to explore this a little bit here. Well, first of all, Arjuna, the whole Bhagavad Gita really is essentially an exchange between Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna is having a crisis of conscience, and Krishna, therefore, is bringing this whole teaching to assist him. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, mover of men, if you regard buddhi to be greater than action," remember I spoke about buddhi earlier, it's a higher level of mind. If you regard buddhi to be greater than action, why do you urge me to carry out this terrible deed? Keshava, this is another name of Krishna. You bewilder my mind with tangled speech. Tell me the one thing by which I will attain the highest good. Then the Blessed One, Krishna is often referred to as the Blessed One. In fact, the very word Bhagavad Gita is often translated as the Song of the Blessed Lord. The fullness, O faultless one, long ago I proclaimed a twofold path in this world. The path of sacred knowledge for people of contemplative discernment, and the path of action, which gets called karma yoga. The path of sacred knowledge is jnana yoga. Path of action for people of disciplined action. It's quite interesting just to remind you, although later on Krishna very much emphasizes the importance of bhakti, which is often gets translated as love, but it is not entirely right simply to translate this as love. It very much has the notion of devotion, submission, acceptance in it. Quite unlike the word agape used by Christ speaking to his disciples, which doesn't have quite that sense in it, because disciples can have agape for Christ, Christ can have agape for the disciples. Whereas Krishna cannot have bhakti for Arjuna. Bhakti is the word which is used for love, but it's love and, as I said, sense of devotion, sense of acceptance. But Arjuna can have bhakti for Krishna. So there is a built-in hierarchy in that expression. So, but that word bhakti is very much emphasized after the 11th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita. But before, it is not even used for the first 6 chapters. The first time it is used is the last shloka in the 6th chapter. Because any notion that I love God or I am loved by God is all man-made by one's own attitude. Therefore, the emphasis is until I can practice the right action and have the right knowledge, talking that I am loving Christ or loving Krishna or I am being loved by them is just my idea. So one needs to be very careful. All these words get used and then get emphasized, but there is a sequence to this. So even here, for example, Krishna is saying, long ago I proclaimed a twofold path. That is not speaking about bhakti or love. The twofold path is, one is about sacred knowledge, and the other one is about the right action. Now, several words get used in connection with the word action. So I thought you don't need to be stuck with it, but some of these words you probably come across again and again if you read the. So I thought I'll take a moment to speak about karma. Means action or work. These days, it somehow has become a tendency in some people, almost like saying, well, this is my karma, as if this is my fate. That's not the meaning of the word, but it's not. It simply means action or work. Karma bandhana means bondage of action. This is a very strong idea in the Indian tradition, that every action that you do naturally has some kind of a reaction or a counterpart to it, etc. So then one is in a whole circle of action and a reaction or a counteraction. Reaction not in the negative sense, but a counteraction. Every action leading to some other action. And as far as the Indian tradition very strongly emphasizes, then one is bound in this bondage of action. Karma phal is simply saying fruit of action, and then very strong call in the Bhagavad Gita about karma phala tyag, renunciation of attachment to the fruit of action. That one needs to undertake whatever one understands is the right action, but don't get so occupied with whether this action will succeed or not succeed, or the fruit of action. Then a word called nash karamya. Literally, it means actionlessness, but it's not without action. So it's actionless action or actorless action or freedom from action. It's very difficult to find a simple translation of that word. But we'll speak about this a little bit more later on. But come back to this remark now. When one has abandoned all identification with the fruits of action and is content and not dependent, though engaged in action, in effect does nothing at all. Steadfast in yoga, the knower of truth realizes, truly I do nothing at all. So to undertake whatever you regard as the right action, or whatever you can seriously regard as the right action, but not to get so attached to its fruit, simply because whether something succeeds or does not succeed doesn't wholly depend on you. In fact, later on, Krishna then even describes certain factors that are relevant to whether the action succeeds. For example, the quality of the actor, and of course, the quality of the action. But there is another word in Sanskrit, it's called devam, which means, if you like, the will or the wish of the devas, wish of the gods, whether this action will succeed or not action. We have many examples of this in history of physics. Several people had exactly the same data available to them, but only one of them, particularly this was true in the case of Newton as well as in the case of Einstein, only one of them comes up with what becomes the right theory. Suddenly, all the other 10 are surprised that we, of course, have this information as well, this data. How come we didn't come up with it? So, same information is available to dozens of people, but one of them receives something, the others don't. From Krishna's point of view, that is not wholly a matter of what a person is doing. It is also partly depends on, we may call it fate or destiny, but those are not the right expressions of the translation of the word daivam. It's divine will. And then, as Krishna says, if one is engaged in action, but without being attached to its fruit or not, then truly I do nothing at all. It is being done in me or through me, but I'm not doing it. So then I become an instrument of Krishna's will. Then a person engaged in a selfless action or an actorless action, Nash Karma, is able to echo, this is my remark, St. Paul saying in the Galatians, what St. Paul's remark is, let me remind you, I am crucified with Christ. I live, yet not I. Christ lives in me. So I'm just simply saying here that a person similarly could say, I act, yet not I, but Krishna acts in me. Here is another remark of Krishna. No one obtains the state of freedom from action, that is nash karma, actionlessness or freedom from action, by simply abstaining from action, which is what I was doing. Remember, going and lying down, just abstaining from action. Nor does one approach fulfillment by renunciation alone. No one ever exists, even for a moment, without some activity. Everyone is forced to engage in action, however unwillingly, by the forces of nature. You and I couldn't survive without having some action or even some movements. Even our body is acting all the time, breathing in, breathing out. Then attend to the work that needs to be done without attachment. Performing action without attachment, one attains the supreme. Janaka and the others achieved perfection by work. Moreover, you should act if only for the maintenance of the world. That also requires action. Now, just a couple of remarks here. The only person that Krishna actually refers to as having come to achieved perfection is Janaka, who was a king. Although in the whole of the Indian tradition, very strong emphasis on meditation, becoming like a Brahmin, and the Brahmins have the possibility of coming to God, etc. But in the whole of the Mahabharata, which is a very large text, actually a Dutch translator said it's not a book, it's a library. That was his remark. It's a very large text. There are only two people who have spiritual wisdom, who try to teach spiritual ideas. Both of them are a Kshatriya caste, warrior caste, Krishna and Bhishma. And the person who teaches weaponry is of Brahmin caste, Dronacharya. So the reason I'm mentioning this, one can, of course, most Indians get too stuck with this caste or that caste. But certainly in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Mahabharata, one sees complete freedom from what caste one belongs to. Then we continue his whole emphasis on action. You have a right only to action, never to its fruit. Do not let your motive be the fruits of action, but do not be attached to inaction. O Dhananjaya, this is another name of Arjuna. Do your work established in yoga and abandon attachment. Be impartial to success or failure, for yoga is equanimity. Samatvam in Sanskrit. Difficult to give one word translation of that. It could also be impartiality. Then Krishna gives his own example. There is nothing at all that I need to do in the three worlds. There is nothing that I do not have or have still to gain, yet I am engaged in action. If I were not ceaselessly engaged in work, all these worlds would fall and would perish. So for the maintenance of the world, he was emphasizing earlier also, I mentioned, Sanskrit expression is loka sangraha, which means preserving the world or maintaining the world. Then very strong emphasis that the right actor has clear perception and knows the one thing that is needful. Then there is no conflict, no decision making, no choice. To have a choice means there is a lack of clarity. I invite you to consider this remark of Krishnamurti, hardly a negligible sage. As long as you have a choice, you are not free. Can everybody see that remark of Krishnamurti? As long as you have a choice, you're not free. Because the tendency is, certainly I have some young friends who have occasionally said, oh, I'm so free, I can choose what I want to do. It's just the reverse. If I am free, that means I know the one thing that needs to be done. whether I like it or I don't like it. That has nothing to do with it. In fact, I give this example here later on. But first of all, to continue, one who refrains from action while continuing to keep sense objects in mind is deluded. That was my problem, lying down in bed there, but very much wishing to have something to eat. Clearly, I was deluded and is said to be a hypocrite. O Arjuna, one who controls the senses with the mind and engages in disciplined action, which is karma yoga, is disciplined action, without anxiety for results, excels. Undertake the necessary action, for action is superior to inaction. Even the maintenance of the body cannot be accomplished without action. The world is enslaved by selfish activity. Therefore, O son of Kunti, undertake selfless, sacred action free from all attachment. Also, there is no suggestion in the Gita that we need to retire from the world or refrain from engaging in the battle of life. The Gita repeatedly emphasizes the importance of engaging in the battle and at the same time remaining above the battle, doing my part and at the same time letting Krishna do his part through me. This is a very strong call that both Arjuna and Krishna are required to be in us, in any actor. Arjuna is a skillful warrior, obviously a great actor, not actor in the theatrical sense, but a great worker. And Krishna is above the battle, with constantly aware. So then, in my judgment, this particular quotation, which I have here from the next chapter, third chapter, is actually more or less the summary of the whole yoga of karma, yoga of action. Offering all your actions to me, mindful of your deepest self, without expectation, without self-occupation, struggle without agitation. If any of you have that interest or Sanskrit background, it is, I mentioned this to you from memory here. Mai sarvani karmani sanyasya adhyatma chetasa nirash niramamo bhutva yudhyasva vigata jvara. In my understanding, this is more or less the summary of the whole of the teaching of Karma Yoga, this particular remark. The one who sees the guna is difficult to describe, but it is said that there are three gunas in Prakriti, in the nature. There are different labels for them, but just think of forces of nature. The one who sees that the forces of nature and nothing else is the doer and knows what is above these forces attains my state of being. Again, just to also to remind you that the call in the Bhagavad Gita is very much to become one with him, to come to his level of being. Madhbhav, he repeatedly uses that expression. Not simply to become his follower, but to become him. Then he says, even the sages are bewildered about what is action and what is non-action. The way of action is profound. One who can see non-action in action and action in non-action accomplishes all work in yoga and is wise among humans. So therefore I invite you, this is a question I'm raising, When the Buddha is sitting under the Bodhi tree, is he engaged in action? What kind of action is he engaged in? So it's good for us to think of varieties of actions, various different labels of action. This is what Krishna is saying. Even the sages are bewildered about what is action and what is non-action. Here, I quote to you from Meister Eckhart, one of my very favorite Christian sage, obviously excommunicated by the church. He speaks very much about to invite God to touch us, but then to become completely poor. Then I read this to you now. A man must become truly poor, as free from his own creaturely will as he was when he was born. And I tell you by the eternal truth that so long as you desire to fulfill even the will of God and have any hankering after eternity and God, for just so long you're not truly poor. He alone has true spiritual poverty, who wills nothing, knows nothing, desires nothing. Even to do the will of God, he says, one needs to be free of that. Because whatever I imagine God is, always one has some agenda behind my effort so that I will become enlightened or I'll get to heaven. I have some notion of God, but constant reminder by all the sages that if they can't describe what God is, you know the description that Christ gives of the kingdom of God, heaven? It's like a mustard seed. So if you feel clear about it now, please let me know. And the Buddha refused to describe what nirvana is. So if even these great sages can't describe, any imagination that I have, any notion that I have, what God is and what I'm trying to do for him, is almost always driven by my own wish for some result, for some notion. And therefore, Meister Eckhart's very strong suggestion to be wholly poor. Try even to be free of trying to do the will of God, whatever I understand by that. Then very strong emphasis, actually this is true in throughout Indian tradition, but here I give you an example from the Bhagavad Gita. Everything is born from the union of the field and the knower of the field. And then Krishna says, I am the knower of the field in every field. Those who undertake violent austerities torture the aggregates of the elements in the body and also torture me, who is seated within their body. Especially Tanner, you should know some yoga people get so carried away wanting to have very austere practices. Krishna is not at all happy about this. As he says, if you take these austerities, you're torturing not only yourself, but you're torturing Krishna, who is seated in everybody's body. Very strong emphasis, come back to the very first remark here again, that everything that exists, even the rocks, have a particle of Krishna in them. This is a very strong emphasis in the whole of the Indian tradition. They don't use the word Krishna necessarily. Brahma. Brahma is the originator of the whole universe. But the universe was not created by Brahma. It emanated from his substance. So everything, every creature, every human being, every stone, every tree has some particle of Brahma in it. This is completely different from the basic notion in the Abrahamic tradition, because then a result of that is if everything has a particle of Brahma in it, looking at human beings, let's say, call is for me to find that particle in me. Therefore, I can identically say, truly say, that my deepest self is identically the same as Brahma. The Father and I are one. Christ could say that. In the Indian tradition, we don't use the word father for God, but that doesn't mean one needs to dismiss the remark. So Krishna very strongly emphasized that everything that exists has a particle of him in it. Then I am the self that abides in the heart of all beings, and I am the beginning, the middle, and also the end of all beings. Devote yourself fully to me as the Supreme. Renounce all your actions consciously to me. Take refuge in Buddhi Yoga. Be always one with me in heart and mind. Those of you who were here, I think it was the first or the second presentation in this whole course where I spoke about Buddhi Yoga is the main yoga that Krishna teaches. And here is another example of that. Now, I had already just spoken a little bit about Nash Karmya, not a state of inaction, freedom from action or actionless action or even actorless action. I am not doing it, but it is being done in me or through me or me, by Krishna's will. Then I am suggesting this another word, Nash Gyanya. This word actually is not there in the Bhagavad Gita. But as you have heard me say that earlier, also Krishna is a friend of mine. He would think this was a good idea. It should have been there in the Bhagavad Gita. So I call you to look at it. It's not a state of ignorance, just like Nash Karma is not a state of inaction, but it is freedom from knowledge or knowledge by unknowing and knowerless knowing. I am not the one who knows it, but something in me is made aware of something. I'll give you an example from John of the Cross. A searcher has an inquiring mind, not a mind that already knows. What is needed is a state of unknowing, not of ignorance, but of innocence, and a willingness to be surprised. The oldest Upanishad has this remark, which is repeated in a later Upanishad. Into great darkness they enter, those who worship ignorance. Into still greater darkness enter those who are addicted to knowledge. Because nobody would disagree that even if we had or anybody had the combined intelligence of Einstein, Shankara, Nagarjuna, Aristotle, they still cannot know all there is to know. So to get attached to one's knowledge is really limiting something. Therefore, a very strong suggestion, a willingness to be surprised. And as I said, this is the oldest Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which says this. And here is the remark of Krishnamurti, very close to this. When the mind realizes the limitation, the narrowness, the finiteness of thought, then only it can ask the question, what is truth? I do not accept truth given by philosophers. That's their game. Philosophy means love of truth, not love of thought. Here is a remark of Socrates. Wisdom begins in wonder. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. You could hardly say that Socrates did not know anything, but the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. This is in the last dialogue of Plato, by the way, if you wish to find it. Then another remark of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. When your awareness is free from the tangle of delusion, then you will become indifferent to what has been said by the scriptures and what might be said. When your awareness, now perplexed by the scriptures, is steady and stable in contemplation, then you will attain yoga. If anybody said this in the Abrahamic tradition, that you can forget about what is said in the Torah from a Jewish point of view, or what is said in the Bible from a Christian point of view, or what is said in Quran from a Muslim point of view, you'll be in real trouble. But it is a very strong, it's right in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is saying, and I don't know whether I quote here, there is a remark of Shankara, a great philosopher in India. He said, when awakening takes place, scripture ceases to be authoritative. Because however subtle the scripture is, however subtly it has been expressed, it still remains within the limitations of the mind. Language is always naturally limited. It has the limitation of the mind. So this very strong suggestion by Shankara, when awakening takes place, scripture ceases to be authoritative. Then here I want to take a moment to say the law of karma is often taken as a law of bondage, that one is stuck, karma bandhana, as I mentioned earlier, the bondage of action. And in general, the suggestion is obviously, as one is, so one acts. And as one acts, so one becomes. And I'm suggesting to you, one could look at the same thing from a different version. Then the law of karma becomes a law of freedom. As one is, so one reacts. As one responds, so one becomes. In my understanding, the whole spiritual development can be expressed in two words: moving from reaction to response. So look at this again. As one is, so one reacts. But if I can then stop for a moment to consider something, as one responds, so one is transformed, one becomes. So at one stage, I was giving a talk in India. I have made this semicolon here in red here. The reason why I have done that is because a well-known businessman there was in my talk. He heard this. He actually started a business called semicolon.com. He was so struck by this semicolon. So his business is called semicolon.com. And here I give you an example of moving from reaction to response. Even in the midst of an excruciating suffering caused by crucifixion, Christ did not react. Instead, he responded and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I can't think of another better example than this in human history. So try to see more and more clearly the difference between reaction and response. And in my judgment, the whole spiritual development can be expressed in these two words. Now, here is a remark, a little poem of John of the Cross. By the way, you probably all know John of the Cross, now in the Catholic tradition, Roman Catholicism, is the doctor of mystical theology. First of all, some of my friends don't realize there are thousands of saints who are canonized, but there are only about, I may not be exactly sure, but only about 20 or 25 doctors. Doctor means they're responsible for the doctrine. So when we say that John of the Cross is the doctor of mystical theology, that is the doctrine that he is responsible for. And he wrote only 12 poems, but my friends who teach Spanish language in the university, they tell me that he's the most highly regarded poet in the Spanish language. Only 12 poems he wrote. This is one of his it's an excerpt from one of his poems. I came into the unknown and stayed there unknowing, rising beyond all knowledge. I was so far inside, so dazed and far away, my senses were released from feelings of my own. My mind had found a surer way, a knowledge by unknowing, rising beyond all knowledge. This is John of the Cross. Earlier I had mentioned there from Bhagavad Gita that our brother Anak Upanishad saying, what is required is freedom from what I know. Nobody is recommending ignorance. Then Krishna also has a couple of other remarks I'll emphasize here. This yoga is not for one who eats too much or sleeps too much, O Arjuna, nor for one who gives up sleep or food. Just to remind you, Krishna is very much oriented towards right living, right action, not total freedom from action or not having any food or this or that. Yoga destroys the sorrow of the one who sleeps, whose sleep and waking, food and play and actions are all disciplined. Sorry, did I go too far ahead? Sorry, I think going too far ahead here. Just excuse me for a minute. Okay, this is what I just read. The yoga is not for one who eats too much or sleeps too much, O Arjuna, not for one who gives up sleep or food. Yoga destroys the sorrow of the one whose sleep and waking, food and play and actions are all disciplined. When the mind is wholly under control and stands stilled in the self, when no desirable thing causes the heart to crave it, then it is said, one is in yoga. Just as in a windless place the flame of a lamp does not flicker, so is the mind of a yogi who practices union with the self. So you see, yoga is not just doing some physical exercises and increasing one's sex appeal. It's a whole different call. Keep your mind on me alone and keep your mind on, I have to bring this down here so I can read it. Keep your mind on me alone and place all your attention on me, then without doubt you will dwell in me forever. If, however, you are not able to keep your attention fixed steadily on me, then seek to reach me by a constant practice of yoga, O wealth winner. And if you are unable to practice, then make it your supreme aim to do my work. Doing all works for my sake, you will indeed attain perfection. But if you are unable to do even this, then with devotion to me, renounce all fruits of action and work with self-restraint. So it gives 3 or 4 different possibilities, trying various things. And then the one whose self is disciplined by yoga sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self, seeing all with equal vision. It's a very strong emphasis, actually. Here, then I remind you that call is really to be more or less completely free of me, me, me. When he says, this is Christ's remark, When you lift up the Son of Man, you will come to realize, I am. Yesterday, I tried to point out that I am is the English translation of Yahweh, and that I do nothing by myself. I say only what the Father has taught me. I'm not myself the source of the words I speak. It is the Father who dwells in me doing his own work. From the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita, this is the definition of a perfect yogi. That's what I have just been trying to describe from the remarks of Krishna. Here I suggest a little exercise to you if you wish to try it. Have you been on some occasion called by an unknown force to act in a way that surprised you and your friends? You ended up doing something. You were surprised that I did it, or your friends were surprised that you did it. What force or energy comes? And here is a picture of Krishna, a 1,000-armed Krishna. This is in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita when he shows his great form. And here I want to make a couple of remarks before we stop. When Krishna shows his great form, Arjuna is completely bewildered. He's actually, this is what he says. You can read this in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Krishna, my mind is completely confused. I cannot tolerate your 1,000-armed forms. Therefore, please resume your 4-armed form. He says, my mind is afraid, but my heart is glad. The reason I'm pointing this out, first of all, you need to watch this carefully. Don't just simply accept what I'm saying. Whatever the mind encounters, it wishes to control it or to predict it. You can see the whole enterprise of science being driven by the mind. Whatever it encounters, it wants to control or predict. And when it is unable to control, which is the case for Arjuna looking at this 1,000 form, then it is afraid. Some of you possibly may have read Ouspensky describing when he first saw the great statue in Egypt, he was afraid. So then Arjuna asked Krishna to take a 4-armed form. That much he can take. Although until that time he had seen only 2-armed forms of Krishna. The reason I'm pointing this out here is that it is quite important for us to encounter, we can encounter only those levels of reality which we can understand or withstand. Certain things blow our mind. Some of you may have read, particularly in the 1980s, when many people were taking drugs, especially LSD. They would feel as if they could fly and they will jump out of the window and die. Many things were visible to them under drugs, but they were unable to tolerate it. That's what I'm saying. Not only what we can understand, but what we can withstand is necessary about the reality. Which is why there is a strong sense that starting students or young students should not be given the highest wisdom, because it will just going to blow their mind rather than that they're able to grasp it. In a very ordinary way, of course, we do this even when we, for example, teaching physics. In the first-year students in the university, we are not teaching them general theory of relativity. We just teach Newton's laws of motion. Only when they come to the graduate level, then we teach them general theory of relativity, because otherwise it's just completely confusing. So Look at this picture of Krishna. There are many other ways it's portrayed. 1,000 arms Krishna with many heads around and hands around. Okay, I think we need to take a little break. It's already, at least according to my clock, 3 minutes past the hour. So we meet at 15 minutes after the hour. And bring your questions or insights, or if anything that I have shown interests you especially, we can look at it again, but otherwise we'll just forget about the slides. Now, anybody who wishes to either raise a question or to bring your own insight or something that doesn't make sense or speaks to you much more than you thought, either way. And Tanner, you were saying yesterday that you're getting more interested in the Bhagavad Gita now.
Yes, I have 4 copies of it currently, 4 different translations. So
Four different translations?
yeah, they've come to me in different ways. So I've just been looking at them all here and there.
But you have 4 copies of the same translation or 4 different translations?
4 different ones, actually.
That's actually not a harmful thing. I always actually recommend to people to at least have 2 translations of a text, because every translation is a kind of a transcreation depending on the translator's own attitude or his own wish or his own project. So, and his background also. So it's good to have more than one if possible. But Priscilla, do you wish to say something? Please do.
Yes, I feel that the topic today is one that brings me, like Arjuna, not knowing where to go from here. Take me back to the usual forearmed four. The call to become free, completely free of my own attachment to the fruits of actions, to become completely free. How does one do that? The call to act do what is necessary and not otherwise. How do you know what is necessary? And to be without choice, as Krishnamurti is saying, then what? How does one act at all? So I think it becomes, if one were a yogi already, and that's what is spoken of, a yogi knows how to act without being attached to the fruits of actions. But I am not a yogi. So how do I get from here to there?
Well, first of all, coming back to this remark of Krishnamurti, what does it mean that I have a choice? It means that I'm not clear what I should be doing. So it's, one could, on the other hand, imagine that I'm so great, I can choose to do X or Y. That's another way of using the word choice. I have a choice to do X or Y, and I can choose.
But suppose I want to choose the right action, and Eckhart would say, don't even choose what God would say is the right action.
No, but he, on the other hand, would also say, just quietly listen and follow. He's not saying that you should stop listening to or wishing more and more receptive to the subtle divine energies that speak to you only when you're not occupied otherwise wholly with something or the other. A little quieting of the mind is a fundamental requirement. Otherwise, we don't hear anything subtle. So that is what sometimes gets called meditation, but it doesn't have to be meditation sitting in a lotus position. Krishnamurti, in fact, quite often even emphasized just going for a walk in the woods can be more of a meditation. In fact, he also ended up describing it in varieties of ways. Meditation, he said, is freedom from thought. Whenever you're freedom from thought, that's meditation. So many different ways of expressing it, but always the suggestion is that the mind is very much occupied with its own trying to associate one thing with the other, something it heard or read or studied, and not willing to hear something fresh or new. So that's the cause. It's not that it's easy, but on the other hand, when we say I have a choice, maybe you could have a choice to find some time for meditation. So that would be your choice. So the word choice itself can also be used in varieties of ways. But the way he is using, or Krishnamurti is using, and I try to mention it, that if you're clear about something, did the Buddha have a choice? Did Christ have a choice?
That's the problem. I'm not at the level of Buddha or Christ.
No, but none of us are. But the call is for us to try to hear something more and more subtly and clearly, and to follow whatever we can. I mean, out of more than 8 billion people on the planet now, and on the average, the lifespan is about 70 years worldwide. So in 70 years, 8 billion people will die. So there's quite a few every year. We'll be among them. How many of them are going to be at the level of the Buddha or Christ? So there is no need to fantasize. But then out of these 8 billion, I'm sure, probably a few hundred at least, are searching for something, wishing to connect with something. And they may not come to the level of the Buddha or Christ. Even the Buddha took many lifetimes, so there is no hurry about that. But they can rise a little bit more where they now are.
I think the most possible call is to move from reaction to response.
Response, yes. Now that
As
is
if
it.
it's a possibility of even a little movement.
Yeah. That's why I mentioned that personally, from my understanding, that could be one way of describing any spiritual understanding, to move from reaction to response, a spiritual development. Tanner, please. He's a yoga teacher, so we need to listen to him.
So I just have a quick question about in the 18th teaching, it's the 67th verse, just for reference. But Krishna says to Arjuna, and this, by the way, is from a translation by Winthrop Sargent. This shall not be spoken of by you to one who is without austerity, nor to one who is without devotion, nor to one who does not render service, nor to one who does not desire to listen, nor to one who speaks evil of me. And is this a call for discernment, or is this like a sort of gatekeeper mentality of, the Gita must be used for good, not evil? Can you just help me to understand what this kind of final saying is from Krishna?
Yeah, well, this is really in a way a suggestion that his teaching is quite subtle, so there is no point just making it as like a public announcement. And then not only subtle in that sense, but also, is it somebody willing to actually try something or the other? So this is, you just read, people who are like this or like that, don't read it to them, or don't talk to them, say what Krishna said. In a way, this is really, if every people who are promoting one religion or the other could actually follow this, they would realize that it's not a question of just proselytizing people or having them agree that I'm a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist or whatever, but that all the teachings of Christ or the Buddha or Krishna, they are all very subtle. And that itself requires a certain preparation. But I don't really believe that Krishna would say that nobody can be taught this. He himself is saying that if he stops acting, these worlds will perish. He doesn't need to gain anything, but he's constantly acting. And similarly, Buddha was going around teaching. Was he trying to gain something from that? Having been enlightened, and I'm sure that's what Christ would have done if he was not crucified. He would be going around and speaking to people, teaching. Even before he's crucified, that's what he was doing. And many people heard him. But again, you probably have heard me say that earlier. My guess is, I don't really know, but I'm guessing that probably 100,000 people heard him in Jerusalem. But how many followed him? 12.5. So I think this remark is really to indicate that there are varieties of human beings, and subtle teachings are difficult to just promote in general.
Thank you.
But now, if I were to honestly take this, I should not be taking this, giving this course on the Bhagavad Gita to people who are not really willing to listen to it. I don't know whether you folks are willing to listen to it or not. I'm assuming that. Otherwise, why would you come to these things? So I often have actually said that I personally very much wish that I'm speaking to some searchers, not just believers. But I don't really know, most of you, whether you are actually searching for something or not. That's my wish and my call. Richard, please speak. He's in the hall there.
I was struck at how similar what you've been describing about choiceless choice is to the Quaker quietness. The Quakers have been real important to me, and I go to their service fairly often.
Mhm.
And to sit in the silence and wait for the guidance is at the core of their practice.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Ananya, please.
I was making notes so I didn't forget, because my
Oh.
mind is a little off today. So Tanner's comment about chapter 18 from the Bhagavad Gita made me start thinking about, how Jesus says, they have ears, but they do not hear. They have eyes, but they do not see. We can't, it's almost as though what Krishna is saying to Arjuna is the fact that it's the opposite of this is where you would be giving this, you would talk about this to the opposite of what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
It's almost as though it's the paradox. Through the negativity, you see the positive.
Yeah, but this remark that you actually had started with a remark of Christ, but even also Prophet Isaiah says something very similar. It's really often the sages say that you have ears but you don't hear, but specifically it's in the Bible mentioned by Christ. You have eyes but you do not see, which is to, again, remember yesterday I was pointing out that there are eyes of the spirit and eyes of the flesh. We all have eyes of the flesh. But the kind of seeing that Christ is inviting us to do, or any of these great sages do, is not seen by the eyes of the flesh. Mm-hmm. Similarly, hearing, not the eyes of, or the ears of the flesh who would hear this. This is, in fact, it's a word some of you may have heard of, vipassana meditation in Buddhism. Vipassana, the very word vipassana, actually, that's a Pali word coming from Sanskrit vipashyana, which means seeing, enhancing one's seeing, or the quality of one's seeing. So the whole purpose there is to really enhance the quality of seeing, to move from seeing by fleshly eyes, but seeing with spiritual eyes.
And would that be more of buddhi? It's direct perception.
Yes, Buddhi, the distinction that Krishna makes really essentially that manas, occasionally he even in talking about the senses, he would say also the manas. Because manas is basically just driven by the bodily fears and desires, usual mind. Buddhi, as I had quoted from Sri Anirvan, a great sage in the 1970s, he said the Buddhi has both a psychological factor as well as a cosmological factor. It can be aware of something above itself. And then it can also assist to control the manas, the ordinary mind, which can then try to discipline the body. So otherwise the body is leading the manas, and then manas sometimes try to completely destroy buddhi. And very strong expression in the Bhagavad Gita. In Sanskrit, buddhi nashat pranashyati. If the buddhi is destroyed, everything is destroyed, Krishna says. And very strong suggestion.
So then that goes back to Priscilla's comment about the fact that, I mean, it's not the mind that is making the choice. There's something that else that is connected that is making the choice that's beyond it, so that the personality doesn't even have a choice.
Yeah.
Because it's driven by a higher force.
Yeah.
And then therefore there's no choice. And the right action happens.
Yes, if we allow this higher force to actually act on us, but if, as Plotinus said, that our psyche is amphibious in nature, it can sink completely into matter, or it can soar into the one. I had quoted this the other day from Plotinus. So it has a tendency to just go to lower and lower part here, get sink into the matter, but has the possibility of soaring into the one.
Thanks, Ravi. So, so I've been coming to see you and your courses and reading your books for about 15 years or so. And for the first 10 of those years, For the first several of those years, I was in graduate school, and you'll probably remember when you would teach about the Bhagavad Gita, I'd come up to you afterwards and ask you these questions because I was feeling this conflict in my purpose, because here I was learning about Bhagavad Gita and being a yoga teacher, but I had this double life where I was being trained as a scientist and was really hard on myself about being logical, and I felt like I didn't really know what was the right action for me. Should I drop out of grad school? And then you gave me really good advice about not dropping out of grad school, and I still credit you for the fact that I have a PhD. So, but on top of all of that, a year ago, the whole time I was never really clear on what is this actionless action that comes from the heart. I thought I hadn't really experienced something like that. And then about a year ago, one of the people I love most in the world had a stroke. And I jumped right into the middle of the crisis because I was the person. Their family actually abandoned them when they had the stroke. And so I took responsibility for them, and I've been a caregiver ever since. And, someone looking from the outside might say, what are you doing? You're ruining your life for this person. Like, I had to quit my job. I had to do all of these things. My life doesn't look anything like it did a year ago. But at the same time, I realized that from the beginning of going through this journey with this person, I've never had a choice. Like, it has always been 100% clear exactly what I needed to do. And it's been the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it's been an exhausting journey, but at the same time, I have this energy that comes from my sacrum that like pushes me forward and through everything that I need to do. And I've just never experienced energy or love or anything like this. And it's just a really good example of how one of the hardest things can also be one of the biggest blessings in your life. But when you were giving the teachings today about the Bhagavad Gita and actionless action, it's settling in and sitting in a way that it never used to before. And I feel like a lot of it is driven by love.
Yes. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Julie, please speak.
I have a story that I just remembered. A few days ago, I had a tree fall down on my property, and I hired a fellow to come and chop the tree down. And so I was out there watching him work and seeing if he needed anything, and sort of making sure that nobody drove up on him as he was cutting a tree down. And at the end, I paid him, and he prepared to leave. And as he prepared to leave, he said, "You did a good job." And so I sort of went, and I looked around like, what? And I said, "You mean me?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "But the only thing I had to do was stay out of the way. You were cutting the tree down. I didn't have anything to do, just make sure I didn't have a tree fall on me." And he sort of smiled and he said, "Yes." So I thought, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So that's my story.
You see, action and actionlessness, as Krishna says, even the sages are bewildered about this.
Mm. Mm.
What is action and what is actionlessness? Okay, so folks, I hope you find some of these seminars or webinars at least engaging enough that you look at some of these texts that I quote. I'm, in general, always try to quote some sages or the other, either the classical ancient ones or relatively modern ones like Krishnamurti or Jean Salzman or anybody else who certainly has spoken to me deep down in my heart. Okay. I'm not trying to suggest to you to become a Hindu or a Christian or a Muslim. Don't become anything. Be free of this. But be a searcher. That's what I call. Okay?